We are. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Lani Habrock here for another episode of our Coffee with the Candidates. So excited today. We have a great candidate coming out of House District 81, which is the Edmond area. His name is Jacob Baccus. So welcome, Jacob.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Lani. It's great to be here.
So I will just introduce you real quick to those who may not be familiar with you. Although candidate Baccus is running in Edmond, he's actually from Western Oklahoma. His dad worked at the Clinton Indian Hospital as a wound care nurse, and his mom was a teacher. As a young adult, candidate Baccus was very involved in his local church, where eventually he served as the youth pastor. He followed in his parents' footsteps and attended at Southwestern Oklahoma State University, SWOSU, where he got a degree in Parks and Recreation Management, which that's very cool. After graduating, he began working in different ministries across the country, eventually ending up in New York City, where he received his Master's of Divinity. So candidate Baccus has had many experiences in life. He's been a minister, an actor, a teacher, and a community advocate. So candidate Baccus, I was reading through your information on your website, and you have a very personal reason for why you decided to run for office. Can you, for those of us who are not familiar with your personal story, can you tell us more about it?
Absolutely. Yeah. So my story really begins, and the reason I decided to run really begins a couple of years ago when my dad, he had been working for the Indian Health Services here in Oklahoma City in the Edmond area. And he had just been laid off because his job, who was the advocate for the wound care specialty there at the Indian Health Services, he passed away, unfortunately, very suddenly. So my dad found himself without a job, and almost simultaneously, he was diagnosed with cancer, two different types, actually. He had stomach and colon. And so I'll get into more of how that's going for him a little bit later on. But so at that point, I decided that it was time to move back to Oklahoma, where I'm from. And so I came to a situation for my parents where they were living out in the country, which they've basically done their whole lives. But this time was a little bit different because the dirt roads they were living on were completely undrivable. My mom was going to work daily, and my dad, with his cancer, recent diagnosis, had to get his tractor out and push her through the mud to get to work. And then he would have to leave his vehicle on the side of the mud that was closest to town so that he could get through. And of course, you know, they weren't complaining about it. They didn't say anything, and they probably didn't know what to do. But I looked at him and I said, this is not okay. We have to do something about this. And so I did. I started by calling their county commissioner, and to his credit, I did get a response, but the response was not what it needed to be for my parents or for anyone in that community, for that matter. They weren't the only ones suffering because of these roads. So I called him, and he gave me excuse after excuse for several months as to why nothing could be done about these roads, including, or he gave reasons, I suppose, as to why it was no big deal. He said that, first of all, they should get a four-wheel drive vehicle and drive through the mud. Again, my dad had just been laid off, and now he has mounting medical expenses. He told them to buy helicopter insurance, which I'm not even sure what that is. Nor do they have a helipad in their backyard. And finally, he said, well, two more things, actually. He said they should just move to town. They shouldn't even live here if he's got all these issues and problems. And then he said, I really just wish people wouldn't live out here, period, so I didn't have to deal with these roads. Wow. And again, this was over the course of several months of conversation. And as this was happening, I began to mount a social media campaign filming exactly what was happening in their area. And eventually that got picked up by one of the local news stations. And they did a piece on the roads and talked about the difficulty that we were going through and how there was nothing being done about it. So the state representative for my parents heard about this story from the news and then contacted that local county commissioner and discussed with him what was going on, why it wasn't being fixed, and what needed to happen. And eventually, after about 5 months, we were able to get those roads fixed. And now my parents live on drivable roads. And like I said, for everyone else in the community, they live on drivable roads as well. So that's what really inspired me. I thought to myself, if I can do this for my parents as a quote regular person, perhaps I could do something like this for my community as an elected official. So I really am running to advocate for people in my community who are just like my parents, maybe don't know what to do, find themselves at their wits' end and need help. I want to be that voice of help, and I want to be that voice for people at the Capitol.
Yeah, so one of the main issues that drove you to run is infrastructural issues. So that's a complaint that I hear from Oklahomans a lot. A lot of people have trouble with infrastructure. As a state representative, as somebody who would serve in the state legislature, on a broader scale, what do you see as some infrastructural changes or things that we can look at as a state?
Absolutely. Well, we can always continue to improve our roads and our bridges and make sure they're up to the standard that they need to be. I know a few years ago we had received a D rating from I can't remember the name of the institution. Nonetheless, they said our roads and bridges were at a D standard. I've got that on my website if you're interested in finding out that information specifically. So I know we need to make sure that we are having safe roads for our people to drive on. If for nothing else, then for emergencies. You don't need to be in an accident or have to drive on an unsafe road when you are in need to get to a place you really need to go. Like I said, particularly an emergency or a hospital visit or something like that. So I would want to make sure that our infrastructure is funded. We're continually working on projects that continue to improve our roads and our bridges. For not only safety for the people, but that also gives us jobs for construction workers as well, who need it, especially during this time of COVID.
Yeah, it reminds me of a funny story. I was talking to this woman one time, and she said that her main concern about Oklahoma was the roads. And she said, I take frequent trips to Texas, and she said, on the way back, my kids in the back of the car. One time, my son told me that he knew that we were back in Oklahoma because the bumpy roads woke him up.
Yeah.
But, so my next question is, your mom was a teacher, and I'd like for you to tell us how that has affected your view of Oklahoma's educational system.
Right. And so, as you mentioned earlier, I've had a lot of experiences as well. And one of those is a teacher. And I like to think that my mom sort of instilled that in me to work with young children and become a teacher, at least for a little while. But I saw the struggle of teachers in those early days of not having the things they needed for their classrooms. She would constantly be going to some sort of supply store. We had Kmart in our town at the time. I don't even know if those are still around anymore, but she would be going and buying supplies for her classroom from those kinds of places. And it was very frustrating, I know. Of course, she never complained about it or anything like that. But I can imagine it was frustrating for her to have to be in a situation where instead of spending time recuperating from a long day's worth of work, or perhaps of grading papers or whatever requirements were requested of her after school was over, instead she was going and buying supplies, and she was making crafts and doing what she needed to do to make sure her kids had the best learning experience possible. And that's not to mention at the time, probably 15, 20 years ago, she was not getting paid very well as well. We were close to the bottom in teacher pay at the time. So that's improved a little bit, but we still have a long way to go.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, so you talked about infrastructure and education. What do you think should be the top priority for the 2021 legislature?
Yeah. So education is definitely a piece of it, but right now, particularly with COVID, healthcare is the most important thing. And that's going to include things for teachers in educational settings and students in educational settings, such as personal protective equipment. And that's going to include all of the hand sanitizers and soaps and disinfectants that teachers need in the classroom for safety and protection for themselves and the students. I was so pleased when we passed Medicaid expansion. I was so glad that we are able now to better protect those who are most vulnerable in our communities, but we can't stop there. As an example, and this is why, to answer your question directly, healthcare is the most important thing, in my opinion, to continue to work towards making sure it's quality and affordable for everyone. My dad, as an example, as I mentioned, has been going through cancer treatments over this past year. Well, he was a military veteran and he worked in the federal government for 30 years. And yet, with all of that service for our country, he still has to pay out-of-pocket expenses for his treatments. He has 2 different kinds of insurances, and it's still not enough for him to be able to receive the care that he needs. And to me, that is not acceptable.
Well, and not to mention he can't work.
Exactly. Precisely, yeah. Particularly during COVID, right? Because he's got he's immunocompromised, so it's really difficult for my parents right now, and it should not be that way for our older citizens or our veterans or those who have given any kind of service to our country.
Well, that brings up another point, is what are your concerns for people on election day, the process of voting? What concerns do you have for your voters?
Well, of course, I think the number one concern is our poll workers. Our poll workers are typically older Oklahomans who go out and volunteer their time to work the polls. So I'm concerned for them, number one, that they have the protection that they need in place to be able to have the polls open. And we can't afford to have the polls closed. I don't care if you're Democrat, Republican, Independent, whatever you are, you should vote. It is incredibly important to vote, not just in this election, but always, to make sure that your voice is heard. But we've got to protect those poll workers. And secondly, we need to make sure that the people who are receiving their mail-in ballots are feeling confident in the fact that their mail-in ballots will be received and processed and counted. I've seen recently where the Postal Service has suggested that we get our that we mail our ballots by October 27th, which is typically a bit earlier than we do. So I really want folks, when they get those ballots, to mail them as quickly as possible so that we can be sure. And you can track those ballots on OK Voter Portal. You could see where they were sent, received, processed, and then eventually counted on November 3rd. So I really want our people to be safe and protected. And I want to ensure that, like I said, our poll workers have what they need, but also that our polling stations require masks so that people do feel that extra level of protection so that they can feel comfort of keeping our polling places open. And I'm just seeing me on the screen now. So Lani, I think I lost you for just a moment.
Adam Soltani, CAIR Oklahoma director here. I'm just going to step in for Lani. We don't know what happened, but technical difficulties are reality, and we're just going to blame it on COVID. How about that?
It's fine. We can blame so many things on COVID in these days, right?
That's what we're going to do. And hopefully Lani will be back. I'm the man behind the curtain, so to say. And now I'm here. I'm live. So we're just going to keep going. Oh, well, Lani's back. Here we go. We'll just, make it a party. Hi, Lani.
Welcome back.
We can't hear you.
Audio is still.
This is fun. So keep working on your audio, but we're going to. Yeah, I don't know what happened, Lani. We're gonna just. There we go. We got we got her out. So, how are you connecting with individuals during the time of pandemic? I mean, obviously, especially running for office, you can't have your meet and greets. It's harder to go door to door and things like that. So, what are you doing to make sure you connect with individuals during this time of pandemic?
Absolutely. So we've been getting our message out there in 4 different ways. So the first way is we've been doing lit drop. And what that means is I've actually got one here and I'll just kind of show it to you. We've been putting these up on folks' doors. And this just simply says, hey, I'm social distancing. I would love to get to know you. Here's my telephone number. Here's my email address. And then all of my social media. So we've been getting those in folks' hands and making sure they know who I am and know they have someone who is listening to them and cares about them. Secondly, we have been sending postcards to folks. We've been making sure that our engaged citizens here in this community, and I just give a quick shout out to folks in the Edmond Blue Coalition and the Edmond Democratic Women who have been fantastic volunteers for me to write these postcards. And they are giving a personal message on those postcards as to why they are supporting me in this election. So people are getting a personal note from individuals. We're also texting folks saying, hey, we're here, we're interested. We want to hear what you have to say. Here's a text with why I support Jacob. I would love to hear any questions. And then finally, the constituents are getting a phone call from either myself or someone else in my volunteer group. And so that's, hey, did you get these other pieces of communication? We want to hear from you. We want to hear your voice because what you think and say and feel matter. And we want to be attuned to that for the community. And we are assessing what knocking on doors looks like, social distance with masks on. And so that is another piece of the puzzle that is being thought very carefully about.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, as a nonprofit, we obviously do not endorse any candidates or campaigns, but we do wish you the best. And we appreciate people who do run for office because that's what really keeps our democracy alive. And that's a wonderful thing. And you're an example for all of us to follow. And so you can find out more about Jacob at his website, jacobbacus.com. Make sure to check that out. And now for my favorite question. Lani, we can still see you, can't hear you, but we're just going to Oh, we can hear you now.
Okay.
I'm having fun here, so I'm just going to keep going, because this actually was a question I came up with. So I love to ask this of candidates, and I want to ask this because I'm familiar with your district. I grew up in Edmond, graduated Edmond Santa Fe, got my bachelor's from UCO. I love Hafer Park. That's in your district. I used to go hang out there, walk on the trails up to the top where I don't know, they still do the Shakespeare in the Park up there.
Obviously, they didn't do it this summer.
Yeah, but I used to walk up there, hang out with my friends. We have a good time. So, what are some of the must see, must do, and most importantly, must eat places in your district?
Of course. Well, you took one of my must sees. So Hafer Park is definitely a must see. It's a lot of fun to walk out there on the trails.
Yeah.
And just kind of have that peace and quiet. I love going over there. Let's see, must do's. Oh gosh. I think probably a must do when you can do it again is to go to the UCO Jazz Lab. I love heading over there, hearing their music and seeing what they have going on.
Absolutely.
And with that, if we're able to go back, if and when we're able to go back to the UCO Jazz Lab, stop by for a pizza from Hideaway. It's really delicious. But I'm going to give you another little institution downtown that I love, and that's Around the Corner Diner. They've been there for quite some time. I love going in there and getting a breakfast. Before COVID hit, my family and I would go in there once a week for breakfast. We started a new tradition of doing that. And then we got to know our waiter, Casey, and she was real fantastic. She was on top of the ball game, knew what we wanted to drink already, and said, hey, well, we've got your norms if you want them, but was always open. So Around the Corner is a really delicious place to go. And there's so many more, of course. I don't leave anybody out, but I think I'll stop there. Otherwise, for fear of leaving out someone.
I got you. Hey, I can't wait till things get back to normal because I love breakfast and I'd love to join you over there for that. At downtown Edmond has transformed over the years. It's a beautiful place. I love it. And so I can't wait till we can do that again, and we'll plan on it. But for now, we've got to say goodbye to our guest speaker. So I'll turn it back over to you, Lani. I wasn't supposed to be here, but I just jumped in. I was having a good time. So I'm going to go ahead and head out, and I'll let you close.
I'm glad you were here.
All right. Well, thank you, Adam, for taking over for all of my technical difficulties.
Yeah.
So quick question. So what do you order for breakfast? It is also my favorite meal of the day.
Yes, breakfast is so good. Well, of course, I have a coffee. The first thing I walk in the door, there's a cup of coffee waiting, and I just drink it black. And sometimes she'll even leave me a pot there, so I can just kind of pour myself some refills. So I'm a coffee connoisseur, or not connoisseur, a coffee consumer. And I typically go for kind of a traditional. I love if I can get some bacon and eggs and biscuits and gravy. That would just be an amazing morning if I could get those things.
Yes, to me, nothing is better than hash browns with an egg over it, where you break that yolk and you mix it up. Oh my God.
Over easy for sure. Oh yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Do you have any final thoughts for us?
Yeah, I just want to tell everybody out there that this race we're in right now for House District 81 is really about the status quo versus change. We've been going along a path of just doing the norm for too long. And I am running to represent a change in our community. I'm running because I want to be a voice for those who feel like they haven't been heard in a very long time, if ever. I'm running because I want you to know that someone at the level of state representative cares about you. And I want you to know that I'm running because I want to know your name and I want you to know my name. This race is about us building something together as a community, and we've had the status quo for too long. So together, I want to bring that change here to House District 81.
Thank you for those closing thoughts. And everybody joining us today, thank you so much for participating in these coffee chats every week. If you have somebody that you want to suggest, please email or comment below. And again, thank you, candidate Jacob Baccus, for joining us. And if you're interested in learning more about his campaign, go to jacobbacus.com. It's down there along the bottom, and we can certainly put the web address in the comments. So thanks, everyone. Till next time.
Thank you, Lani.